Ruedi Giger was a Swiss surrealist artist known for merging the organic with the mechanical in his art. In the late 1970s, screenwriter Dan O'Bannon met Giger during Alejandro Jodorowsky's doomed Dune project and was absolutely thrilled by the artist's disturbingly captivating biomechanical creations. We're pretty sure it was a wave of emotions that Dan O'Bannon didn't even know he could feel. When O'Bannon co-wrote Alien in 1979 with Ronald Shusett, he urged director Ridley Scott to bring Giger on board to design the film's monster. Scott agreed immediately after seeing Giger's artwork, convinced that Alien needed a creature unlike anything seen before. And how right he was. In an era riding on a new wave of sci-fi and horror, from Star Wars to Halloween, Alien sought a uniquely terrifying monster, one that would push genre boundaries and make the film unforgettable. But the thing is, Giger's original Alien design wasn't exactly what we got on screen. It had several sexual undertones and design elements that gave more serious male and female genitalia vibes, almost veering into pornographic realms. But the changes and dilution of the original design is understandable because when you're adapting art into cinema, cinematic restraints and compulsions come into play. And in this video, we're going to explore everything there is to explore about Giger's original Alien design. It's absolutely fascinating, and we think you'll agree, but before we get into things, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's begin. Origins. The birth of the Xenomorph. H.R. Giger's Necronom 4, 1976. Giger's vision for the alien sprang from his earlier work, especially the dark art compendium called Necronomicon. Among its rather hellish and absolutely nightmarish pieces was a lithograph titled Necronom 4, which depicted a sinewy demon with an elongated, phallic-shaped skull and inhuman anatomy. As you can see, this was like the base of the cocktail that would keep us intoxicated even 4.5 decades later. Yeah, you heard that right. The Alien universe will be hitting the big 5-0 in just 4 years. Don't think about it too hard. It's actually scarier than Alien Resurrection. Anyways, this eerie figure was part humanoid, part insect, and part machine, and it immediately grabbed Ridley Scott's attention. Scott later recalled flipping through Giger's Necronomicon at 20th Century Fox and stopping at Necronom 4. When Dan O'Bannon asked Scott, "What do you think of this?" all he had to say was, "Good God, I don't believe it." That's it. He knew instantly that this was the monster he wanted on screen. O'Bannon felt the same way. He had met Giger years prior and was quote-unquote haunted by the originality of his grotesque designs. In fact, O'Bannon had visualized the alien creature as a Giger painting even while drafting the script. Getting Giger officially on board the project, however, took some doing. Early on, the producers were wary of his transgressive style. O'Bannon noted that the executive producer, Walter Hill, didn't want to touch him and resorted to hiring other concept artists before Giger was locked in. Initial creature designs by artists like the late Ron Cobb were competent but too conventional. Among the discarded ideas, one pretty much looked like a giant crab-like beast with 4 legs. They lacked the visceral, otherworldly quality that O'Bannon knew only Mr. Giger could bring to the table. Once Ridley Scott came on board as director, he lent his full support to hiring Giger. Scott was enthusiastic to create a monster superior to most of those from the past, and Giger's disturbing surrealism promised exactly that. With the studio's blessing finally secured, Giger flew to England and began transforming his 2-dimensional nightmare into the creature that would become known as the Xenomorph. From the outset, Giger's Necronom 4 concept served as the foundation of the alien's look. Still, some elements evolved during development. The painting's biomechanical monster had an overtly phallic head and other anatomical extremities that were deemed too fantastical and perhaps too explicit for a mainstream film. As Giger and the filmmakers refined the design, the creature's cranium remained long and cylindrical, but was toned down so that it didn't literally resemble a human penis. Its facial features became more predatory, which meant that now there was a vicious array of metallic teeth, but most importantly, there were no visible eyes at all. Giger had initially sketched the alien with glossy black eyes, but someone quipped that it looked like a Hell's Angel in black goggles, which inspired Giger to remove the eyes entirely for a more unsettling look. You see, if you can imagine a pair of goggles on the creature, the entire idea of otherworldliness is just not being executed well. Even the implication of a human touch to it ruins it, and hence the decision was made, and it made the creature eerily inscrutable, which in Giger's own words was like a striking snake that can find you without seeing you. Other additions that rounded out the beast were a spiked bladed tail inspired by a scorpion's sting, a sleek carapace over the skull, and skeletal tubing protruding from its back. Screenwriter O'Bannon also suggested one feature that wasn't in Necronom 4, a mouth inside a mouth. The now infamous inner jaw would shoot out to punch through victims' skulls. Combined with corrosive acid blood as a defense mechanism, which was another idea the team adopted during development, the alien was kitted out as the ultimate unstoppable predator. By drawing directly from Giger's surreal horror imagery and then polishing those concepts for film, Scott, O'Bannon, and Giger together birthed the being that felt ancient, alien, and perversely real. The Biomechanical Aesthetic, blending flesh and machine. Although it was just a man in a suit, Ridley Scott ensured that wasn't evident to the viewer, so when you look at the Xeno on screen, you really believe that it's a biomechanical nightmare made flesh. And speaking of flesh, did you know that certain extraterrestrials like Reapers actually consider Xenomorph flesh, especially facehuggers, to be a delicacy? Fun fact for you. Anyways, moving on, Giger's biomechanical style, which he developed in paintings throughout the 70s, uses living organic forms with industrial machinery. In Alien, this aesthetic manifests in every inch of its anatomy. The creature's skin is a glossy black exoskeleton, as if bone, muscle, and metal had been alloyed together. Its elongated skull is smooth and cylindrical, which evokes both a predatory animal and the fuselage of some deadly machine. Along the sides of that dome-like head, one can see ribbed, pipe-like shapes and sinewy ridges, almost like hoses or cables running under the skin. Yeah, cables, not veins. Needless to say, Giger literally incorporated mechanical components into his sculpture, and the detailing on the alien's body that the creature artists used actually had real metallic tubing and engine parts to emphasize the fusion of technology and biology. The dorsal protrusions on its back resembled exhaust pipes or vertebral spines, so you can see how far they went to make us believe that this creature was a mix of machine and beast. As mentioned earlier, the Xenomorph has no eyes in its adult form. Instead of a recognizable face, it has a smooth, eyeless facade under a translucent forehead dome. Inside that semi-transparent dome is a human-like skull structure. Damn, Giger even embedded a real human skull in the prototype for added realism. This guy really was something. So, the victims and viewers of a Xenomorph can't lock eyes with it, making it inscrutable and inhuman. The lack of eyes also reinforced the idea that the creature needed no eyes to hunt. Its other features also mix animalistic and mechanical elements. The hands end in clawed, bony fingers with two opposable thumbs on each hand for extra grip, yet the fingers appear almost piston-like in their jointed segmentation. The legs are long and digitigrade, so when the creature stands or crouches, its knee joints are high and bent like a grasshopper's. The tail is a seriously deadly whip of vertebrae and mechanical blades, and it's agile like an animal's but segmented like some sort of chain tool. Giger envisioned every part of the alien as an interplay of the familiar and the alien. Eroticism and horror, Giger's psychological inspirations. Beyond its raw physical power, the Xenomorph's design carries a heavy load of psychosexual horror. While creating his art, H.R. Giger drew on the fears of the deepest levels of the subconscious, often sexual and grotesque, and Alien's creature is perhaps the most famous expression of those themes. Critics have called the Xenomorph a nightmare vision of sex and death, and it's hard to miss the sexual undertones in its biology. Let's start with that phallic head. It's long, smooth, and aggressive, and it unabashedly suggests male sexual aggression. Giger admitted that this was intentional, describing the finished alien as a demon with a long, extended, phallic-shaped head, the most frightening thing he could imagine. Then, there's the creature's method of attack. The phallic symbolism continues with the inner jaw that punches out of its mouth. The inner proboscis is effectively a weaponized phallus with metallic teeth, which then forcibly penetrates victims' skulls. As Giger and the writers envisioned, the alien life cycle was explicitly designed to evoke the most horrific form of violation, that is, rape and forced reproduction. This is a movie about alien interspecies rape, Dan O'Bannon once said while explaining how the facehugger implants a seed in a human host, which later violently births through the chest. If you think about it, the facehugger represents both male and female genitalia at once. It subdues and opens a human body to impregnate it, which in itself is a very literal reversal of sexual roles that left male audience members especially shaken. Later, in its adult form, The alien strikes its victims with a rigid phallic tongue that rips through flesh, an act loaded with symbolism. And the tongue's barbed end, with its set of snapping teeth, conjures the concept of vagina dentata, the ancient fear of a devouring sexual organ. Giger managed to merge these masculine and feminine fears into one organism while creating a creature that is symbolically androgynous and sexually alien. Clearly, it has no visible genitalia or gender, yet everything about it, from its penetrative attacks to its parasitic breeding, feels like a twisted sexual nightmare. Giger drew inspiration for these horrific ideas from his own psyche. He often said that his art channeled his deepest fears, including traumatic nightmares he suffered since childhood. As a boy, he was plagued by night terrors, and drawing the morbid things he dreamt about became a form of therapy. These included visions of death, birth, and unsettling eroticism. In interviews, Giger connected his fascination with the macabre to his early experiences like the trauma of birth and the dark atmosphere of growing up near World War II Germany. Alien gave him a canvas to pour all those subconscious fears into one creature. The sexual undertones were quite deliberate. Giger believed that horror with an erotic edge could tap into viewers' primal anxieties. "I always wanted my alien to be a very beautiful thing, something aesthetic," he said, noting that a monster can at once disgust and attract. Indeed, there's an uncomfortable sensuality to the Xenomorph's design. The glistening wetness of its mouth and skin, the supple, almost graceful way it moves, and the disturbingly intimate nature of its attacks. Giger's artwork had long blended erotic and morbid imagery. With the Xenomorph, he set out to confront the audience with those subconscious terrors up on the big screen. Constructing the alien, bringing the monster to life. Translating Giger's frightening design from canvas to a full-fledged creature on film was a monumental task, one that required close collaboration between the artist and a skilled special effects team. Giger wasn't content to simply hand over a sketch. Convinced only he truly understood the creature, he became deeply involved in sculpting and constructing the alien suit and props. Initially, special effects artist Roger Deakins attempted to build the creature based on Giger's drawings, but literal fidelity to the Necronom 4 proportions proved impractical. At one point, Deakins mocked up the alien's head nearly 6 feet long to match the painting's scale. It was absurdly large and unwieldy on a human body. The early prototype looked like a dinosaur from Disneyland, according to Giger, and it was scrapped. Frustrated with the false starts and short on time, Deakins actually quit the project. Giger took it upon himself to sculpt the creature by hand, aided by a few assistants in a workshop at Shepperton Studios. It was an enormous challenge and much more difficult than painting, he said. It had to look good from every angle, he said, but Giger dove in obsessively. As a base, he used a life-size cast of Balaji Badejo, the man who would wear the suit. Giger built up the alien form in plasticine clay around it. Balaji was a 26-year-old Nigerian design student who stood 6 foot 10 inches tall with an exceptionally slender, long-limbed physique. He had been discovered by a casting agent in a London pub, which was a stroke of luck after Ridley Scott's team scoured for someone incredibly tall with very long legs. They even tried to cast a 6'6" female fashion model and groups of contortionists strapped together before finding Balaji. Balaji's body was ideal for the job, and when he crouched, his knees rose up high like an insect's, and standing, he was towering yet gaunt, like a Giacometti sculpture, as Scott described him. Over Balaji's body cast, Giger began layering the alien's anatomy. He incorporated real human and animal bones into the clay sculpt, and a human skull formed part of the creature's head, and actual snake vertebrae became sections of its ribcage and tail. Flexible hoses, plastic tubes, and even a piece of a Rolls-Royce engine were embedded throughout to achieve the biomechanical texture. By the time the full creature maquette was complete, it was so frightening that even crew members flinched upon entering the workshop. From this sculpture, molds were made to create the wearable suit. The exterior skin was cast primarily in foam latex, which is a flexible rubber that could be painted in texture. Giger himself airbrushed the suit, giving it a glossy, wet-looking black finish that accentuated the details. Initially, Giger and Scott hoped to cast the suit in a translucent material so that the creature's innards would faintly show through, much like the translucent layering of Giger's paintings. Tests were done with hot melt vinyl, but the clear suits proved too fragile and were abandoned in favor of opaque rubber. The team did retain a translucent dome for the alien's head, made of vacuum-formed plastic, which covered the front half of the skull like a smooth windshield. Beneath this dome, they tucked in the partial human skull prop and other details to give the impression of a skull shape lurking under the surface. A major aspect of bringing the alien to life was the creation of animatronic components. especially for its menacing double-jawed head. Renowned Italian effects designer Carlo Rambaldi was commissioned to build mechanical alien heads for close-up shots. Rambaldi constructed at least 2 hero heads with internal mechanisms that could articulate the jaws, lips, and that deadly inner mouth. The inner jaw, often called the tongue, was essentially a spring-loaded piston that could shoot forward out of the creature's throat on cue. Rambaldi's team installed cable-operated systems to control these movements with precision. Giger supervised the finishing touches, and he insisted on chrome-plated steel teeth for both sets of jaws to give a biometallic glint. In fact, the Xenomorph's teeth were cast in hard resin and then electroplated to appear metallic, so even this effect was basically a mix of flesh and machine. For the tendons on the sides of the alien's jaws, crew found a creative solution. They stretched and shredded latex condoms. Yep, you heard right. They really used latex condoms to create slimy, translucent tendons that flexed with the jaw movement. Once the animatronic head was assembled, Giger slathered it liberally with KY jelly to simulate saliva and slime. The goo cleverly hid any seams or mechanical gaps, making the inner workings difficult to spot on camera. By the end, gallons of lubricant were poured over the creature during filming, giving it that unforgettable, dripping, glistening appearance as it emerged from the shadows. Inside the suit, poor Bolaji Badejo had his work cut out for him. The final costume was heavy and claustrophobic, consisted of numerous latex pieces, up to 15 separate sections applied over a tight black bodysuit, with the massive head being placed last. Once encased, Bolaji could barely see and could only endure the heat for 15 to 20 minutes at a time before needing a break. Simply moving in the costume was challenging. An initial version of the suit was so stiff that Bolaji couldn't achieve the fluid motion Scott wanted. The effects team went back and modified it, creating multiple suits optimized for different positions, standing, crawling, etc., as well as adding some flexibility to the joints. Still, some of the creature's intended grace had to be suggested through clever cinematography rather than on-set acrobatics. Long shots were minimized, and the alien is glimpsed mostly in flashes, keeping its awkward bits literally in the dark. To help Bolaji perfect the Xenomorph drone's elegance, Ridley Scott had him take mime and tai chi classes, which helped him move slowly, fluidly, and unpredictably. Bolaji developed a gliding, deliberate style of movement. You see, the alien doesn't lumber, it uncoils and slithers, albeit with poise and a certain otherworldly grace. This physical performance, combined with the superb practical effects, made the alien a convincingly inhuman creature. Censorship controversies and studio pushback. Unsurprisingly, Giger's disturbing design didn't sail through production without ruffling some feathers. 20th Century Fox executives initially had strong reservations about the creature's grotesque and sexualized look. When Dan O'Bannon first showed Giger's Necronom 4 painting to the studio, some were outright repelled, and let's be honest, the image of a glossy skeletal being with a phallic head and vaguely erotic overtones was far from the typical Hollywood creature fare. Fox initially turned down the design, feeling it might be too disturbing to audiences, and only relented later. The sexual and violent aspects that Giger wove into the alien were pushing 1970s boundaries for a commercial film. Censorship concerns came into play, especially regarding the creature's overtly sexual features. For example, Giger's early concept sculpts included pronounced eyes and even nipples on the alien. The eyes, as mentioned, were dropped when the team agreed the creature was scarier without them. Giger also initially gave the creature a sort of skull cap or protuberance that resembled the penis of certain men. Under pressure to avoid anything that might veer into the pornographic, this was modified into a smoother, more elongated dome. In Giger's words, the head was elongated but no longer resembled a penis. After all, the alien was meant to be a character in a widely shown movie. The creature's overall silhouette retained its biomechanical strangeness but lost any literal genital suggestions. Even the infamous egg designs were changed drastically. Giger modeled the alien eggs with a 4-lobed opening that resembled a vaginal orifice, which Fox executives found too graphic. The design was tweaked to a cross-shaped slit to tone down the sexual connotation, though it remains plenty suggestive. Giger, for his part, fought to preserve his vision as much as possible. He wasn't one to easily compromise on artistic integrity. When early attempts at building the suit didn't capture the bizarre quality he wanted, Giger was reportedly frustrated, and anytime the creature started looking too much like a man in a suit or a generic monster, he really lost his shit. As mentioned earlier, special effects artist Roger Dickon felt so much pressure and continual changes from Giger in the production that he quit building the creature, claiming he was being set up for failure. Giger's high standards could create friction, but they also ensured the final monster remained true to his frightening concept. In the end, Fox executives came around when they saw the finished product's potential in play.
This will give the parents nightmares.
Ridley Scott acted as a buffer and backed Giger's bold choices. Well, he knew that the alien's shock value was exactly what would set the film apart. While a few explicit details were clipped for decorum, the core erotic horror essence of Giger's design survived intact. The studio's marketing even leaned into how disturbing the creature was, with the now infamous tagline, "In space, no one can hear you scream." Iconic features. What made the Xenomorph so terrifying? Even if you've never heard the term Xenomorph, you probably instantly recognize the creature from Alien, which proves just how iconic this beautiful atrocity is. So let's now talk about a few of the features that make the Xenomorph what it is. Eyeless, ominous face. In horror, we often search a monster's face for some hint of intent or emotion, but the Xenomorph offers none of that. This eyeless visage taps into our fear of the unknown, and we can't tell where or what it's looking at. As Giger noted, giving the creature no eyes made it even more frightening. It roams like a predatory black shark or insect, guided by senses beyond our understanding. Audiences in 1979 had truly never seen a movie monster with an entirely eyeless face, and it unnerved them deeply. The film smartly emphasizes this feature with tight shots of that smooth, eyeless head looming out of the darkness. It creates the impression of an intelligence that is cold and utterly alien, a perfect organism with inhuman focus. In the novelization, Ash speculates it might see via electromagnetic waves like a shark or snake, but on screen it remains a merciless blank, and Alien Earth confirmed that the creature can sense fear. In other words, it studies an organism's vitals to learn about the fear as well as their position. Elongated skull and silhouette. The Xenomorph's profile, complete with that enormous elongated cranium swept back over its shoulders, became the defining image of the creature. The skull not only looks bizarre and otherworldly, it also gives the creature a curiously graceful aspect in contrast to other lumbering monsters. Critics noted that the alien had an almost artistic beauty in its lines, like an H.R. Giger sculpture come to life. The smooth carapace of the head, covering where eyes should be, makes it resemble an evil exoskeletal knight from the medieval era. The choice to keep the head smooth in the first film gave the original Xenomorph a slick, almost aerodynamic look, as if built for penetrating through the air or through a victim's chest. Oh, and James Cameron's aliens would later show ridged, more insectile heads for the adult warriors. The second mouth, inner jaw. If one image had to sum up the alien's horrifying impact, it might be that moment where its slavering jaws open and a piston-like inner jaw shoots out with a hiss. This was a masterstroke of design that startled even seasoned horror fans. The sheer shock of a creature having a secondary set of weaponized jaws inside its throat was new to cinema and became the alien's signature attack move. The inner mouth was shown punching through a human skull, which meant instant death at close range. Viewers realized that even if you managed to avoid the alien's claws or tail, one snap of that hidden maw could puncture your skull like a bullet. By now, you know that this idea played on deep-seated fears of penetration and parasitism. For instance, some real-life eels and insects have a pharyngeal jaw mechanism, but most people had never seen such a thing, especially on the big screen and especially in 1979. Clawed hands and digitigrade legs. Though less flashy than the head, the alien's limbs contributed to its terror. Its hands were bony and elongated with 6 digits, 2 of them thumbs, allowing a vice-like grip on prey. Early designs even gave the creature extra fingers protruding from the chest, but these were scrapped as unnecessary. Still, the clawed hands we see are almost human, but the extra thumb and skeletal look make them look like something else entirely, as if evolution took a different path. The alien's legs, built on Bolaji Badejo's stilt-like frame, bend in a way that instantly reads as not human. When standing, the creature often assumes a stilted, erect posture, but when moving quickly or crouching, the legs fold up high like a praying mantis or a panther ready to pounce. This digitigrade stance gave the alien a panther-like agility and a creepy animalistic presence. The combination of those hind legs and a surprisingly fluid motion, thanks to Balaji's mime training, meant that the alien could appear almost elegant, in turn made it even more terrifying. Unpredictability And stealth. While not a physical design feature per se, it's worth noting how the above elements combine to make the alien's on-screen presence extremely fear-inducing. The eyeless creature could remain motionless in the shadows and be mistaken for part of the ship's shadows or even the machinery until it moved. Its biomechanical body let it blend into the dark corridors of the Nostromo. Because Ridley Scott wisely kept its full form partly obscured, audiences were on edge trying to anticipate what this creature really looked like and what it might do next. If you compare it to another great movie like Jaws, you'll notice that Jaws lost some of its fear factor once you saw the shark clearly in the bright light. The alien looked anxious to viewers not only in dark places but also in bright places from any angle. The impact of these features on audiences and critics was immediate and immense. Time magazine called it a gothic chimera that no one who sees it will ever forget, and Variety praised its realization as genuinely horrifying. It's no surprise that the film won the Academy Award for Visual Effects, but that the creature has topped countless scariest monster lists in the years since. The design held up so well that even today, over 4 decades later, viewers find the original Alien as creepy as ever. In fact, even someone like Roger Ebert, who's super strict in his reviews, said this about the Xenomorph: "This alien, it must be said, is one hell of a monster." Influence on sci-fi and pop culture. H.R. Giger's original Xenomorph design fundamentally altered the trajectory of creature design in science fiction and horror for decades to come. The influence of the Xenomorph can be seen across a wide spectrum of media. In the immediate aftermath of Alien's 1979 success, filmmakers and artists were quick to take notes. Creature features in the 80s and 90s increasingly attempted to replicate the alien's blend of beauty and grotesquerie. For example, the Cenobites of Hellraiser have Giger-esque elements of sadomasochistic body modifications and biomechanical flesh, clearly inspired by the aesthetic shock that Giger introduced. The wildly popular video game Dune from 1993 featured hellish biomechanical demons that the designers openly modeled after Giger's art and the alien's visceral look. Even The Matrix from 1999 borrowed from Giger's visual language of skeletal machinery while depicting its machine world. Metal and punk music album art of the 80s frequently used Giger's work, and he even painted album covers for bands like Celtic Frost and Danzig, thereby splicing the Xenomorph's DNA further into pop culture. Within the Alien franchise itself, the original Xenomorph set a high bar that sequels either adhered to or deviated from at their peril. James Cameron's Aliens expanded the lore and introduced the concept of a Xenomorph hive with dozens of adult warriors and a queen. Cameron tweaked the creature design a bit, and the adult Xenomorphs in Aliens have ridged biomechanical skulls. He also made them faster and more insectoid in movement. Unlike the Silent Stalker from the first movie, these guys now worked in swarms. While Aliens was hugely successful and its depiction of the creatures is loved by one and all, some of Giger's original elegant evil thing was traded for heavy action thrills. Giger himself had no direct involvement in Aliens and later expressed mixed feelings about how his children evolved. In an open letter, Giger noted that Aliens and Alien 3 strayed from the finer points of his designs, though he did acknowledge that Alien Resurrection brought the look closer to his original vision. The Alien sequels also expanded on the life cycle Giger helped to conceive. They introduced the Queen Xenomorph, a massive egg-laying matriarch designed by the legendary and super-skilled Stan Winston, obvious Giger influences in her biomechanical crown and body, and various host-derived variants. Yet, even as other artists built on it, the core template of the Xenomorph remained unmistakably Giger's. Later films like Prometheus and Alien Covenant, quasi-prequels directed by Ridley Scott, leaned heavily back into Giger's design language. Prometheus didn't feature a classic Xenomorph until a brief proto-alien cameo, but it was drenched in Giger's aesthetics, from the colossal engineer-based aliens to the interiors of the derelict spacecraft, which were a recreation of Giger's 1979 set designs. The film even includes a mural of a xenomorph-like figure. Alien Covenant then brought back full-fledged xenomorphs and neomorphs, updating them with modern CGI but largely sticking to the slender, vicious form Giger had given them. You see the neomorph creature in that film, pale and eyeless with phallic-shaped head, and it was practically a love letter to Giger's Necronomicon art. Outside of films, the Xenomorph became a staple in comics, novels, and games. Dark Horse Comics produced numerous Alien series in the 80s and 90s, always drawing the creature in Giger's biomechanical style, sometimes pushing the designs into new weird variants, such as mixing xenomorphs with predator DNA and sometimes with members of Batman's rogues gallery and more. But the base look remained consistent. In video games, Alien Isolation from 2014 is a critically acclaimed game that has a single xenomorph stalking the player aboard a creaking space station, and the developers painstakingly recreated Giger's 1979 Alien model down to the smallest detail. The smooth dome, the skeletal body, the dripping jaws, everything. The fact that a 2014 game chose to model its monster on a 35-year-old design rather than some updated variant speaks volumes. In broader culture, the term xenomorph itself entered the lexicon to describe any frightening alien organism. The alien is referenced in everything from The Simpsons to Spaceballs, which even parodied the chestburster scene with the little alien doing a top-hatted dance. Finally, it's worth noting how the xenomorph influenced the way filmmakers approach horror and sci-fi. After Alien, the idea of combining sci-fi and visceral horror became much more mainstream, leading to films like The Thing, Event Horizon, and more. Directors realized that a futuristic setting could house truly nightmare-inducing creatures if designed well, and many started hiring artists, often surrealist or outsider artists, to conceptualize creatures, much as Giger was an outsider from the traditional effects world. Without Giger's Alien, it's hard to imagine the same level of grotesque detail in later creatures. Even the recent Netflix series Stranger Things clearly borrows from Alien's DNA, as the Demogorgon creature has an eyeless head and a phallic toothed appendage for a mouth. Marvelous verdict! Giger's original Alien is immortally influential. The Xenomorph launched a franchise that spanned 45 years and will continue to live and breathe for at least another 100. It's flown into pop culture, while the creature itself remains a gold standard in monster design. The Xenomorph's design is a blend of features from fear-inducing Earth creatures like insects, spiders, scorpions, and all of these aspects are then merged with a distorted humanoid silhouette to create something unknown to nature. The result of this biomechanical balancing act is a monster that looks evolved in some terrifyingly twisted way, as if birthed from a fleshy mom and a metallic father, or vice versa. It's one of the most influential creature designs of the 20th as well as the 21st century, and that's the sole reason why it still has the power to excite and scare people. No creature before or since has quite matched the Xenomorph's nightmare fuel-like nature, and yeah, that's exactly what it is. Nightmare fuel. Unfortunately, that's all the fuel we got in the Nightmare bus, so that brings us to the end of this video. As always, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.